Welcome to another episode of Domino Theory, the podcast at the crossroads of media, business, and politics. I'm Christian White, and joined as always by Mark Simon in his car. Mark, why are you in your car?
God put me here because basically we had a thunderstorm and we had those massive thunderstorms the day before 4th of July. And guess what? They're finally getting around to fixing it. Now, I will say it was quite bad. We had 80-mile-an-hour winds, so everything came down. But here's the funny thing. I have had power continuously up until 2 hours ago. In other words, 5 days out. And that's because down the street from me, they finally taken the wires off the ground. So when they took them off the ground, they had to do it. So they in fairness to them, they came around and said, we're going to take your power out. I thought they were going to take it out sometime around 8 o'clock at night. They decided a little bit earlier. I guess they want to watch, they weren't going to watch the World Cup. But yeah, so that's God. And then also I'm in New Jersey. And so everything that happens bad, they blame God because they don't want to take responsibility themselves. So,
Well, that's good. They believe in God. Of course, they don't believe in God in a very important capital, or at least the corridors, the power of a capital, Beijing. And you have an interesting development, the release of Pastor Ezra Jin. So the Chi-Coms, Xi Jinping potentially throwing Trump a bone, not a particularly big bone. This is actually more of a favor to Xi Jinping than it is a concession to America, I would argue at least.
yeah.
We're going to have a summit in late September. Xi Jinping is coming over. He might come over for the General Assembly, but clearly the key events, and, I think as you and I have discussed, our belief that commies love pageantry, formal state visit at the White House on par with what King Chuck got a couple of months ago. They're going to eat it up. But I wonder, is Trump being a little too optimistic? Is he being potentially misled by some of the last, China experts? So I don't know, Michael Pillsbury, something like that out there.
Yeah.
What do you think's going on?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's absolutely wonderful that Ezra Jin got out. I mean, there's another guy in there. We, of course, know my boss, Jimmy Lai, and there's others, and we'd love them to get out too. But the fact of the matter is overall, this was a smart move by the Chinese. Jin was being supported by the evangelicals over here. He hadn't done anything really all that bad. In other words, when you actually looked at the charges initially, the initial charge could have been 3 to 5 years, which basically means a year. So he served 266 days of a sentence. So, he might have done some more, but it's good the Chinese did it. And the fact of the matter is President Trump's the one who did it. I was watching people going, all our hard work. That deal was cut, and I'm pretty firm on this. That deal was cut in that room when Xi Jinping said no to Jimmy Lai. He basically said yes to, Pastor Jin, and that's a wonderful thing that happened for that family. And I've met the daughter, and I think it's just wonderful that they've got him back. However, not related to them. I think one of the things that President Trump is probably hoping for from Xi Jinping is that he can start developing something for the United States in terms of growing trade. I don't think it's going to happen. I am not of the Gordon Chang view that they're going to fall over tomorrow. I think Gordon actually knows China very well, but I don't believe that China is going to fall apart in the next couple of days. However, the next couple of years even, and maybe in the next forever. It's a wealthy society at certain levels, and it's basically functions okay for the average person. So why do you want to go back into basically what they could view their mothers and fathers told them was chaos of the 1960s and 70s? So they're not going to go for that, in my belief. The other thing is that, quite frankly, they don't have the pressures they used to have on them. In other words, real estate's cheap, housing's cheap. There's a reasonable amount of jobs, food flows fairly freely. So in that way, they're stable. But here's the point. All of that is stagnation. They are not growing. They're aging, getting older every year, the age of the people. They're declining in terms of numbers because their birth rate is really only about 1.1. So they're way off. And they're seeing a real estate bubble collapse where a lot of their wealth is being sucked out of their pockets. So they're not going to be able in the position to buy. Donald Trump has this belief that there's 1.4 billion Chinese. I'd say it's probably closer to 1.3 billion now, and dropping by 5 or 6 million every year. And that is going to come out and save the United States, that he's going to be able to sell them all these goods. The president is getting bad information. I think somebody has to walk in there and say, Mr. President, these are the numbers, these are the trends. Would you build condos there as a developer? And his answer would probably be no.
Right, and this is not anything new. I mean, this is I mean, you can say the British bought this going back to maybe the 1600s. Certainly, some people got rich. Certainly, some Scotsmen in Hong Kong did, and then a bunch of people in Hong Kong. And then, of course, the United States. And I do believe that it's a Pacific century, and the focus of cultural and economic power is shifting, at least out of Europe. But the idea that you're going to go and it's this huge consumer market. It's, however, depending on whose statistics you trust, 1.1, 2, or 3 billion people declining. And golly, that's a lot of people. That's so many more than we have here, but they don't want what you're selling. Or if they do, they're just going to buy one copy and steal it. And it's sort of the oldest, is it Lucy with Charlie Brown in the football, or Patty? I guess it was Lucy who took away the football. Yeah, it seems, I think the charitable story is Trump got into this, ratcheted back up pressure on China, realized how dependent we were on rare earth minerals, and needed a year or 2 or 3 to source them elsewhere. Although, the Japanese went through this in 2010 with the Chinese, and then they sort of resolved that pretty quickly. Anyway, the optimist story is that Trump is just biding his time. He's fighting, obviously, a lot going on with Iran, with Europe, renegotiating USMCA with Canada and Mexico, so he doesn't want to fight 4 fights at once, although he certainly seems willing to do that. But then there's this more pessimistic case, and I think you're right that basically, that trade is going to solve this, and that you just have to be nice and have a good relationship. What do you think going into the summit? I mean, is it going to be just more pageantry, or do you think Trump will be in a more confident position to try and get something from Xi?
I think that's the problem. The problem is you can be as confident as you want, but if somebody doesn't have anything, what can you get for them? I often think of the soybeans where President Xi goes out and he promises the Canadian soybeans, then he promises the Brazilian soybeans, then he promises the Australian soybeans, and then President Trump goes, well, we're going to sell soybeans. If you are so inclined, go look at the amount of soybeans that we've been selling to China over the last 15 years. It declines every year. That's not because our soybeans are inferior. It's because there's world markets, but it's also because there's fewer Chinese. They're aging. Soy is not as part of their lives as it used to be. And it's this bizarre situation where, the Chinese may be buying some more nice beef, some more steaks. That's small, but they're going to be buying less hamburger, and they're going to buy from the global markets. So I'm just not seeing the things that people want them to buy from us that's going to be successful. I don't see it. That's my biggest problem. My biggest problem is we have to suspend basically the facts in order to finish this story that China is going to save us. And I think that's a huge problem. I mean, you get what I'm saying. In other words, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, I was just, and it's not just the soy, it's not just farmers. I mean, I want farmers to do well. And I sure, better for them to be eating soybeans than pangolins. Sorry, cheap shot. But anyway, it's not just, it's the tech bros here too. And this whole idea that we have to have China on our stack, which sort of, okay, I guess I can understand that. And certainly, the administration, it's funny, the administration has been less restrictive of tech and AI than its Democrat predecessor, even though tech, I'm convinced, is still chock full of pinkos. You have Anthropic, who basically doesn't want to help the Department of Defense, but comes crying to the government when they realize China is stealing its technology. Pretty big. Well, anyway, that's a separate issue. Do you think that some of the easing of export controls that Trump has agreed to? And Peter Navarro was on, I think it was Maria Bartiromo's show or some other Fox Business show, where he clearly did not agree with this policy in the administration he was a part of. But I don't know. I guess the hope is that Trump toughens up. Or where do you think things are with tech?
I think the problem is fundamentally President Trump is a property developer. And I think also President Trump basically doesn't, it's not uncommon for a man of his age not to completely understand technology. And so he has these people come in here and he goes, Elon's worth $1 trillion. John, he looks at this, he sees them super successful, and then he moves forward. For example, I'll give you an example. NVIDIA is constantly running around all over DC. Jensen Huang, the CEO, some people I know people in the Trump administration who are around Trump, and I've talked to one or two of them. They actually think NVIDIA makes chips. They don't understand that they basically have the designs and they source it out, outsource it. And so you hear things from this White House that when it comes to China is really more hopeful thinking than anything else. I get it. My belief is really what this Trump is what he wants to do is just keep things even keel, try to keep things growing. And I myself think he just wants China on ice. I've always kind of believed that. He wants to cut his deal with Xi Jinping, shake hands, and then no more. I don't think he's looking for a trade war with them. Um, I'm not certain that he's looking to solve the rare earths problem the way he is, you know what I'm saying? And that's because if you really were solving the rare earths problem, you'd be working with the Canadians and the Australians a little bit more, you know what I'm saying? And we are, but it is one
Mhm.
of these things that I just wonder about. That said, I think all of that said, I think President Trump has probably been more successful with China over his 2 terms than any president we've had. I mean, he's nailed them with tariffs. He's got business moving back.
Mhm.
He's pushing them into unpopular positions all over the West and all over places. And I'll give you an example. For example, Japan, really it was under Abe, under the first Trump administration, that Japan started rising up. And, you know, basically they're a firm ally now. The Philippines is a firm ally. Southeast Asia is kind of making the call on our side. The Europeans and the other folks, I think they're now seeing China for what it is. In other words, they don't have the U.S. market to fall back on. So the fact of the matter is they're stuck dealing with China. And what does China do? Nothing. China's not helping the Europeans. So I think in many ways, Trump, it's like I told somebody, it's like, Trump is the guy who shows up and people are like, oh, but he's the guy who pays for everything, and he's like the uncle that pays because the U.S. pays for everything. Well, now the uncle is pulled his money back. So you're hearing everybody whine and cry, but sooner or later they're going to have to start pulling their own weight. And I think that's what Trump does when it comes to China. In other words, he's making the world pull its own weight against China, and I think that's very good.
Right. No, and that there, we have, of course, a strong counterpoint in a negative sense to what Trump is doing, and that is the Vatican. Now, you work very
Ugh.
closely when you were in Hong Kong with Cardinal Zen, who was appointed by Pope John Paul II, I believe, not appointed, but elevated, and
But
who has stood,
Benedict,
with the people
it
of
was
Hong
Benedict.
Kong. Okay. All right. All good.
Sorry
It's
about
after
that.
Benedict AB that things start to get iffy. And then we go to today's Pope, getting to the point where basically my understanding is China is allowed now input and a veto over who gets to be a cardinal. It's this view, and it was the view of the U.S. State Department until, frankly, Donald Trump got elected, which is that China will only be an enemy if we make it an enemy. China's rise will be peaceful unless we do something to disrupt it. And it's such, this goes back to the economic thing. Same with religion. It's such a big market, if you will, such a big group of people, you can't ignore it. Am I characterizing correctly the view of the Vatican? I mean, my view of the Vatican is they're soft on China. Their foreign ministry was worse than our State Department was during Obama as far as weakness on China. They have a left-wing pope who wants to talk about climate, how there supposedly aren't any just wars. Don't tell that to the former slaves. Don't tell that to the people who fought the American Revolution. Don't tell that to the people who were liberated Auschwitz. This guy who wants to be a liberal politician, it seems like. And, as we were talking before the break, I used to go to Episcopal church. I can tell you what happens to a church when they stop ministering to their flock and playing politics. But anyway, how am I doing? Am I characterizing this right?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, look, there's Catholics who were hoping that Leo would be better than Francis because Francis was such an unmitigated disaster, especially for the American church. The American church is more conservative than the European church. And the fact of the matter is the majority of Catholics did vote for Donald Trump. We now have a second pope who basically has decided to go to war with Donald Trump. But from my perspective, probably the one hopeful spot that we thought might emerge was basically a reworking of the Vatican deal cut under Francis with China. In other words, to basically pull back a little bit and say, China's not living up to this. We need China to do things for us. We need China to step up and basically start honoring the agreements. China hasn't done any of that. It's gotten worse. And we see the Vatican that's scared. And I myself have a very negative reaction to this. I was in Hong Kong for a long time. I saw the church abuse Cardinal Zen, a loyal servant of the church, because they were trying to do things. I have met dozens of, church, whether it's priests and nuns or devout Catholics in China who've suffered because the Vatican won't say anything. And the fact of the matter is, on a personal level, this Vatican has done nothing for the most well-known Catholic dissident in the world, Jimmy Lai. They do nothing. Francis has done nothing. And I don't blame Pope Leo yet. And the reason why is he's getting around to it. But we forget that Pope John Paul, when he came in, he didn't change what's called osteopolitic, which is like their real politics. He didn't move away from that from a doctrinal point of view in terms of right away. It took him over almost 2 years where he started becoming really anti-communist. And he kept people around who were basically appeasers. However, what he did do is he started using his pulpit and he started talking about the evils. He started talking about things. What would it cost Leo to say, free Jimmy Lai? What would it cost Leo to say, please take care of Jimmy Lai? What would it cost Leo to say, we're praying for Jimmy Lai? He won't do any of that. And that's because apparently the Vatican believes taking care of a Catholic is too high a price to pay. And they roll out this ridiculous argument that, well, if we praise Jimmy Lai and if we get involved with Jimmy Lai, then we're going to hurt other Catholics in China. They got no proof of that. It's never happened. It won't happen. I can't see why they would do it, But the fact of the matter is we have a Secretary of State, Parolin, and his immediately cronies around him, who for whatever reason, and I think it's purely ideological, because I think they're probably closer to the Chinese ideologically than they are to the West, they want to basically keep a relationship with the CCP more than they want a relationship with the West. And that's just the way it is. They value that relationship with the CCP at a higher than they value it with the U.S. and with many Western countries.